I watched my daughter-in-law throw it in the trash like it was garbage. Not metaphorically, literally into the kitchen trash bin, wrapped in a paper towel like it was a used tissue. "Cassandra, what are you—" I started to say, but she was already walking away, her designer heels clicking against my hardwood floor like a countdown. "If it's so valuable, why would you just give it to us?" she said over her shoulder, not even turning around. "Old money is the tackiest thing in the world, Margaret. You can keep your inheritance games." My son Michael stood frozen in the doorway, his face draining of color as he realized what she'd just done. I hadn't told them what was really in that vase yet. I'd only told them it was worth millions. That's when everything changed. 24 hours earlier, I'd found James's hidden journal. 47 years of marriage, and I'd never seen the key to his study desk. But when the estate lawyer came through after my husband's funeral, there it was, tucked into a sealed envelope marked "For Margaret." The journal was leather-bound and meticulous, dated entries spanning 50 years, but the last page made my hands shake. A sketch of a vase, pale blue, cranes in flight. Below it, coordinates, a date, 1974, and a single sentence in my late husband's careful handwriting. "For our grandchild, the family's greatest asset." We didn't have grandchildren yet, but we would, and when we did, James wanted them to understand something about legacy that he'd never told me in all our years together. I held that journal to my chest in the darkness of his study and realized I had married a man with secrets. I texted Michael, "Dinner this Saturday, you and Cassandra. I have something for you." He called back immediately. "Mom, is everything okay? Is this about the inheritance?" "Just come," I said. Saturday evening, Cassandra arrived in a crimson dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She always did that, made casual family dinners feel like red carpet events. Michael looked uncomfortable, which meant she'd already complained about being here. I'd made James's favorite lamb, the one I hadn't cooked since his funeral. Over the meal, before dessert, I placed a small wooden box on the table. Inside, resting on black silk, was the vase. It was exquisite. The glaze was luminous, almost alive. The cranes seemed like they might actually fly away. "It's beautiful," Michael said softly, picking it up. "But it's just a Ming Dynasty," I interrupted. 15th century, possibly earlier. Your father had it appraised decades ago. Conservative estimate, $2 to $5 million. Cassandra's hand froze mid-reach for her wineglass. "That's not funny, Margaret," she said quietly. "I'm not joking." "Why would you just give us something worth millions?" Cassandra's voice had gone sharp, dangerous. "Because your father wanted his legacy to matter," I said carefully. "Not as money, but as—" "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Cassandra interrupted, standing up. "Old families and their old money and their weird inheritance games. As if we need your permission to have nice things. As if we need your dead husband's approval to be important." She grabbed the vase from Michael's hands. "I don't want this," she said. "I don't want any of it." And then she walked to the kitchen. I heard the trash can open. I heard the sound of ceramic hitting plastic and metal. The vase broke with a sound like my heart stopping. Michael's scream caught in his throat. He ran to the kitchen, his face going white as he saw the pieces scattered in my trash bin. Cassandra calmly returned to the table, cut another piece of lamb, and began eating like nothing had happened. "If it was real," she said, "you wouldn't have given it to us anyway. You would have kept it. Which means this was a test, and I failed. Fine. But I'm not going to spend my marriage bowing to a dead man's ghost." I picked up the pieces slowly, my hands shaking. Michael stood frozen, watching his wife like she was a stranger wearing a familiar face. But as I gathered the largest fragment, a curved section containing about a third of the vase's body, I noticed something that made me pause. The interior glaze was different. Hidden beneath the beautiful exterior was another layer of decoration, more ornate, more deliberate. My hands moved on pure instinct. I slipped that fragment into my cardigan pocket without thinking, without consciousness, my body acting on an instinct I didn't yet understand. An instinct that had belonged to James. That night, after Michael and Cassandra left in strained silence,
I locked myself in my bedroom with the fragment and James's journal. I read his entries again, more carefully this time, looking for hidden meanings. And I found something that changed everything. In the margins of an entry from 1974, the year we honeymooned in Beijing, James had written a single phrase in code. The craftsman's seal marks the beginning. I pulled out my reading glasses and held the fragment up to the lamp. There, carved into the hidden interior glaze, was a series of tiny characters, a cipher, a key to something James had spent 50 years protecting.
I'd never been to a university office before. Dr. Robert Chen, Associate Professor of Chinese Art History, looked up from his desk as his secretary showed me in. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the kind of careful demeanor that suggested he didn't get excited about things easily. "I have something I need you to see," I said, "but before I show you, I need to know this stays between us." I unwrapped the fragment from its silk handkerchief. Dr. Chen's entire body went still. He spent 15 minutes examining it with a magnifying glass. His expression grew harder to read with each passing second. Finally, he looked up. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "My husband," I said, "before he died." "Is he still alive?" Dr. Chen's voice had changed. It was urgent now, careful. "Does anyone else know about this?" "He passed away 2 years ago. Only my son knows I have the fragment." Dr. Chen set down the magnifying glass with fingers that were slightly trembling. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me very carefully. Are you aware of the existence of the Imperial Archives of the Kangxi Emperor?" My stomach tightened at his tone. "No," I said. "Should I be?" "In 1912, Dr. Chen began, during the Chinese Revolution, an entire collection of imperial documents disappeared. Scholars, scrolls, personal records from the Kangxi court, one of the greatest repositories of knowledge from the 18th century, gone. Historians have been looking for over 100 years. He picked up the fragment again, this time with reverence. "This glaze work," he continued, "this particular technique of hidden interior decoration, I've only seen documentation of it used once in historical records. It was employed by imperial artisans to conceal documents inside hollow ceramic vessels." My breath caught. "You're saying—" "I'm saying," Dr. Chen interrupted, "that if your husband had a complete vase, not just a fragment, and if it contains what I think it might contain, you're in possession of something that could rewrite Chinese imperial history. It would be one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in the last century." He paused. "It would also make you extremely rich and extremely vulnerable."
Michael arrived at my house the next evening with red-rimmed eyes. "I filed for divorce," he said without preamble. "Yesterday. After dinner, I went to a lawyer and started the paperwork." I pulled him into a hug, my heart breaking for him and relieved at the same time. "Cassandra's true self," he continued, "has been showing for a while. But that dinner, when she threw away Dad's gift without even trying to understand what it meant, I realized I've been making excuses for her cruelty for 3 years. We sat in my kitchen with cold tea between us, and I made a decision. I told him everything. The journal, the cipher, Dr. Chen's revelation, the hidden documents inside the vase. "So the piece I found," Michael said slowly, "that's the key?" "To understanding what was inside, yes. But Michael, we still don't have the vase. Cassandra destroyed it." "No, we didn't," Michael said, his accountant brain already working. "We destroyed part of it. But the largest piece, the one you rescued, that contains significant portions of the pattern, and the base, which held the cipher." He pulled out his phone. "I know where Cassandra's yoga instructor lives. She goes there on Sunday mornings. I can access our apartment and get whatever fragments survived." For the first time in 2 days, I felt hope. In my garage, wearing surgical gloves, Michael and I carefully arranged 23 ceramic fragments across a white sheet. "There," Michael pointed, "that's the rim. And here, part of the crane's wing. If we work backward from the painted sections, we can map the entire piece." It took hours, but slowly the blue vase began to take shape again. Broken, unmistakably damaged, but whole enough to see what it had been. The largest unbroken section was the base, and carved into its interior glaze, in characters so small they almost seemed to shimmer, was the imperial scholar's cipher. "This is incredible," Michael whispered. "But Mom, we still don't know what's actually inside. The vase is hollow, right?" "According to Dr. Chen, yes. The documents would be rolled or folded, hidden inside the glaze chamber itself." Michael looked at the broken pieces with reverence. "Then we need to go to Beijing. We need to find Master Lin." "Who's Master Lin?" "Someone Dad's journal mentions. A craftsman, a keeper of secrets." Michael's eyes gleamed with determination. "And Mom, I'm coming with you. This is family history. It's my responsibility too."
I'd never been on an international flight before. 71 years old, and I was boarding a plane to China to hunt for hidden imperial documents. James would have been amused. I held the cipher fragment in my lap the entire flight, terrified of losing it. Michael sat beside me, reading everything he could find about Ming Dynasty ceramics and imperial archives. In seat 12D, 2 rows ahead, a man named David Sullivan was updating his client via encrypted email. He was a private acquisition consultant, which was a fancy term for someone who helped rich people steal things legally. He'd gotten a call from a woman named Cassandra who was angry, vengeful, and desperate for money. She told him about a Ming Dynasty vase worth millions. She told him about an old woman in Massachusetts and a Beijing address. She told him the phrase, "The cranes are flying south." And now David was flying toward the same destination, unaware that the woman 2 rows behind him already had what he was being paid to find. In seat 15C, a young woman named Li Wei was also monitoring the situation. She was a graduate student who'd become suspicious of Dr. Chen's recent behavior and had decided to follow Margaret to see what was really happening. Beijing, it seemed, was going to be very crowded. The address from James's journal led to a narrow shop in the hutongs of central Beijing, the old traditional neighborhoods that looked like they hadn't changed since the 1950s. The storefront was unmarked, the windows were dusty, but when I pushed through the cluttered entrance, I felt James's presence so strongly that I nearly gasped. "Hello?" I called out. An old man emerged from the back. He was easily 90, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes bright behind thick glasses. "We're closed," he said in English. "I'm looking for Master Lin," I said. "The cranes are flying south." The old man's entire body went still. Slowly, carefully, he set down the teacup he'd been holding. His hands were now visibly shaking. "You have James's eyes," he said finally. "The same shape. I would have known you anywhere." "You knew my husband?" I asked, confused. "I knew him very well," Master Lin said. "Come, we have many things to discuss, but not here, not on this street." He was right. From across the hutong, David Sullivan was lowering his camera. 2 blocks away, Li Wei was frantically texting Dr. Chen. "She's here," she wrote. "She's meeting someone. What do I do?" Dr. Chen, sitting in his office thousands of miles away, put his head in his hands and realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Master Lin's home was above his shop, a traditional Beijing apartment that smelled of ink and old paper, with walls covered in scrolls and paintings. He poured tea with a steady hand despite his earlier trembling. "Your husband came to Beijing in 1974, he began. "He was on his honeymoon with you. My grandson, Chen Hui, had written to him with a request." "A request for what?" Michael asked. "To protect my mother's life work," Master Lin said. "She was an imperial scholar, one of the most educated women in 18th century Beijing. When the Cultural Revolution came, she knew her documents would be burned, so she spent years collecting them. She gave them to master artisans who hid them inside ceramic vessels." He stood and gestured for us to follow him up a narrow wooden staircase. The attic was dusty and pristine, untouched for decades. On a small table sat a dozen ceramic fragments, no larger than a hand. "These are pieces that broke," Master Lin explained. "I've kept them safe, waiting for someone to continue my mother's work. Your husband understood the responsibility. He said he would teach his children about preserving knowledge." Michael looked at his mother. She was crying silently. "Why didn't he tell us?" Michael asked. "Because," Master Lin said gently, "the secret had to be protected until the world was ready to hear it." Master Lin led us to another room, his workshop. The walls were lined with shelves of tools that hadn't changed in 200 years. On the central table lay the reassembled blue vase, looking both fragile and eternal. "Now," Master Lin said, "we must open it." He worked with the precision of a surgeon, using tools so small they looked like needles. It took nearly an hour to carefully break through the sealed interior glaze without damaging the vase. Finally, he extracted the contents. What unrolled before us was a document written on silk in elegant Imperial-era Chinese. Below it came another, and another, 50 pages of imperial history written in a woman's hand. On the final page, in modern English handwriting, was a note. For whoever finds this, my great-great-grandmother was the most brilliant woman in her century, and the world told her she didn't matter. Please don't let them say that about anyone else. J.C., 1974. Michael's hand covered his mouth. Dad was here, he whispered. Dad met this scholar's descendant and chose to protect their legacy. He did more than that, Master Lin said quietly. He authenticated these documents. He added his testimony that they were real. He made it possible for them to matter someday. Outside, in the Beijing darkness, 3 different people were closing in on this room, not knowing the moment they were about to change history had already happened.
The knock on the workshop door came at midnight. 3 officials entered, led by a woman in her 50s named Minister Wu. "These artifacts are cultural property of the People's Republic of China," she announced formally. "They must be surrendered immediately." My heart sank. After everything, 50 years of protection, the journal, the broken vase, James's secret, the documents would be taken by the government. But Master Lin didn't look afraid. "Minister Wu," he said calmly, "how did you know to come here?" "We received a report from an academic institution," she said. "Dr. Robert Chen," Master Lin confirmed, "a scholar of integrity." He turned to face us. "Your father made me promise something in 1974. He said, 'Don't let the secrecy destroy what my great-great-grandmother preserved. In the long term, secrets make truth weaker. So I have waited 70 years for the right moment.'" He bowed to Minister Wu. "I place these documents under the protection of the Chinese government on one condition: they must be published. Scholars must have access. The world must know that a brilliant woman in the 18th century preserved her own legacy." Minister Wu's eyes filled with tears. "My daughter is studying history at Beijing University," she said softly. "This will change everything she knows about her own heritage." While we were meeting with Minister Wu, a phone call changed everything back home. The police were calling from Massachusetts. Cassandra had been arrested at the airport, attempting to flee with stolen jewelry and canceled credit cards. But that wasn't the real reason they were calling. After David Sullivan had stopped returning her calls, Cassandra had spiraled. She'd broken into Michael's apartment looking for information about the vase. When she couldn't find anything, she'd panicked. She attempted armed robbery, the officer explained. She held a knife to a jewelry store employee's throat. She's facing serious felony charges. Michael went pale as he listened to the details. Cassandra, who had thrown away a priceless artifact in anger, who had hidden her cruelty behind designer clothes and sharp words, who had been so afraid of being ordinary that she'd destroyed herself trying to be extraordinary, was now facing prison time. "We recommend you press charges for the destruction of property," the officer added. But when Michael looked at his mother, he saw sadness instead of triumph. "Don't," he told the officer. "Just get her a good lawyer. She needs help, not punishment." David Sullivan arrived at the workshop to find it surrounded by government vehicles. His years in acquisition had taught him to read situations. This situation was unreadable, which meant it was time to leave. He caught the next taxi to the airport, already calculating how much he could recover from the deals he'd been planning. But he'd underestimated Li Wei, the graduate student who'd been following Margaret. She had documented every email, every communication, every arrangement to sell stolen cultural artifacts. By the time David's plane took off, 3 countries had his file. By the time he landed, Interpol had him in custody. His kingdom of acquisition had crumbled in 24 hours. Within days, the documents had attracted international attention. Historians from universities across the world arrived in Beijing to examine the manuscripts. Chinese scholars worked alongside Western academics. The collaboration was unprecedented. The documents were extraordinary. Mathematical equations that predated European discoveries, medical knowledge centuries ahead of its time, astronomy observations that revealed an empire more advanced than anyone had realized. But most importantly, they revealed a brilliant woman's voice, preserved across 2.5 centuries. Lady Chen Mei had written about her life, her education, her frustration at a society that wanted her to be decorative. She had written about freedom in 1,000 different ways, through academic essays and personal journals and philosophical musings. She had written about mattering. And now, finally, the world was listening. On our final day in Beijing, Michael and I stood in the workshop, looking at the vase one more time. The pieces had been carefully assembled. The broken seams were visible, a reminder of what Cassandra had tried to destroy. "Why do you think Dad kept this secret?" Michael asked. "Because secrets protect things in the short term," I said, remembering Master Lin's words. "But in the long term, they make truth weaker. Your father was waiting for the right moment, the right people, the right circumstances." When Cassandra threw it, Michael said quietly, she thought she was destroying something she didn't understand, but she was actually completing Dad's plan. The vase broke in a way that revealed the hidden glaze. The cipher became visible. It all led here. I took my son's hand. "Sometimes," I said, "the worst moments create the greatest opportunities. And sometimes the people who hurt us teach us the most important lessons." Michael nodded, understanding that we were talking about more than a vase now.
6 months later, I attended the release party for The Hidden Writings, the Imperial Scholarship of Lady Chen Mei, 1720-1782. The book was magnificent, full-color reproductions of the documents, English translations, academic papers placing Lady Chen Mei's work in historical context, essays by female scholars about what her survival meant for history. Dr. Chen gave the opening remarks. He looked exhausted but proud. "Sometimes," he said, "the most important discoveries are made by ordinary people in ordinary ways. A woman keeping a secret, a journal hidden in a desk, a vase carefully preserved through a lifetime of dedication. These are the discoveries that matter most because they tell us about love." The room erupted in applause. I sat in the front row, listening to my husband being praised by the world's leading historians, and I knew he would have been embarrassed. But he would also have felt relieved. Finally, the burden of secrecy was over. A week after the publication party, I received a letter from Cassandra. She was in a minimum security facility awaiting trial. She'd asked permission to write to me. The letter was simple. "I'm sorry. I understand now that I destroyed something precious, not because it was valuable, but because I was afraid. I was afraid that I would never matter the way you and James matter. I was afraid I wasn't important enough, and when I saw something you loved, I had to destroy it to make myself feel less small. I'm getting help now. I hope you can forgive me." I read it 3 times. Then I called my lawyer and told him something that would surprise everyone. I wanted to help pay for Cassandra's legal defense, not to excuse her actions, but because I recognized in that letter the first sign of her actually growing up. Michael called me that evening, shocked by what I'd done. "She threw away a priceless artifact," he said. "She threw away a vase," I corrected. "She hurt you, she hurt herself, and now, maybe for the first time, she's trying to be better."
Before I left Beijing, Master Lin gave me another vase. This one was small, unassuming, but when I looked inside, I saw the same hidden glaze, the same careful work. "Your husband and I had a plan," Master Lin explained. "He kept one vessel for his family. I kept another."
"Tell us. When should it be opened?" I asked. "When your grandchildren are old enough to understand the weight of legacy," Master Lin said. "When they're ready to be trusted with secrets."
Michael and I kept the second vase in a special box in his safety deposit box. We wrote a letter to accompany it, explaining what it was and why he should protect it. But underneath our letter, Michael added something of his own, a message for children he hadn't yet had. "Your great-grandfather James believed that knowledge is the greatest gift we can give. Your great-great-great-grandmother believed the same thing.
They took incredible risks to preserve truth. When you're old enough to understand what that means, when you're ready to be trusted with this, you'll open it and find out what they were trying to tell us.
Michael's divorce from Cassandra was finalized 3 months later. She pleaded guilty to aggravated assault. Her sentence was reduced because she accepted responsibility and participated in mental health treatment. She was released after 14 months of incarceration.
3 years after the publication of Lady Chen Mei's documents, I became a grandmother. Michael remarried to a woman named Sarah, who was a historian. They had a son named James, after his grandfather. Little James was brilliant. At 5 years old, he was already asking about everything, about history, about family secrets, about why some things mattered more than others. Michael started teaching him about his great-grandfather, about the vase, about Lady Chen Mei. I watched my grandson grow up in a world where female scholars were celebrated, where history was preserved not for profit, but for truth, where my husband's secret had finally become public knowledge. On my 80th birthday, Michael took me and little James to the museum in Beijing, where the original blue vase was displayed. My grandson stood in front of the glass case, his small face pressed close, his eyes wide with wonder. "Great-Grandpa James hid that?" he asked. "He protected it," I corrected, "for people like you." "Why?" I thought about how to explain legacy to an 8-year-old. "Because there was a woman," I said, "who was very smart and very brave, and she wrote down everything she knew. And people wanted to destroy it. So your great-grandpa helped keep it safe until the world was ready to listen." Little James nodded, understanding more than he should have. "I want to protect things too," he said seriously, "important things." And I realized that James's legacy had already passed to the next generation, not as burden, but as responsibility, not as secret, but as purpose. Dr. Chen became one of the world's leading experts on Lady Chen Mei. He published 17 papers on the documents. He established a scholarship fund for female historians. He mentored dozens of students in the rigorous art of preserving historical truth. He never mentioned that he'd almost lost everything by accepting confidential information from Cassandra. He never mentioned that his graduate student had essentially saved his career by following Margaret. Instead, he devoted his life to ensuring that no voice, no matter how long silenced, no matter how deliberately hidden, would ever be lost to history again.
When little James turned 16, Michael decided it was time. He took his son to the safety deposit box and showed him the second vase, the one Master Lin had given me all those years ago. "Your great-great-great-grandmother, Lady Chen Mei, left us something else," Michael explained. "She left instructions inside this vase, instructions about something that matters as much as the first documents did. But we can't open it until you're ready to understand the responsibility." "How do I know when I'm ready?" James asked. "You'll feel it," Michael said. "You'll understand that legacy isn't just about the past, it's about the future. It's about deciding who you want to be and what you want to protect." Little James, not so little anymore, held the vase carefully. "I'm not ready yet," he said finally, "but I will be." I started writing my own journal at 85. Not to keep secrets, but to preserve truth. I wrote about James and his 50 years of protection, about Cassandra and her journey from destruction to healing, about Master Lin and the impossible weight of legacy carried across generations. I wrote about how a broken vase had changed history, about how the worst moment of my life had led to the greatest discovery of the century. And I wrote about what I'd learned, that sometimes love means keeping secrets, but the greatest love means knowing when to reveal them. At 88 years old, I returned to Beijing for the 10th anniversary of Lady Chen Mei's publication. The museum held a special ceremony. Historians from around the world gathered. Minister Wu was there, now retired, watching her legacy live on through academic excellence. Master Lin had passed away 3 years earlier, but his granddaughter attended the ceremony. She represented the family's final message. The protection is complete. Now comes the sharing.
Little James was there too, now in college studying history. He stood beside the glass case containing the vase and understood, finally, what his family had sacrificed to protect. At the end of the ceremony, I gave a speech. I talked about James, about the journal, about the secret that had become a revolution in how we understood Chinese imperial history. I talked about choosing to trust, to protect, to believe that truth eventually matters more than secrecy.
On my 90th birthday, my family gathered in my home. Michael was there with his children. Little James was now a graduate student in history. His younger sister, Margaret, was studying preservation science. Sarah brought photos of the latest exhibition about Lady Chen Mei that had opened in 3 different countries. Minister Wu's daughter, now herself a distinguished historian, sent a message thanking our family for what we'd done. And in the corner of my living room, on a special shelf, sat my copy of the published documents. Next to it was James's journal, and on the shelf below, carefully protected in a climate-controlled case, was the reassembled blue vase. Broken but whole, destroyed but preserved, a monument to the power of protecting what matters. Michael poured champagne for everyone. "To Great-Grandpa James," he said, raising his glass. "To Lady Chen Mei," I added. "To legacy," little James said, understanding finally what his family had been protecting all along. As we clinked glasses, I thought about how a vase thrown into the trash had changed history, how a woman's rage had revealed a woman's genius, how 50 years of secrecy had led to a lifetime of sharing. I thought about Cassandra, who had finally learned to matter by helping others matter, about Master Lin, who had carried his mother's voice across nearly a century, about James, who had understood that the greatest gifts are the ones we protect not for ourselves, but for the future. And I realized that this was what legacy truly meant. Not objects or money or secrets, but the understanding that each generation inherits not just the past, but the responsibility to protect the truth that matters. The vase was beautiful, but the real treasure had always been the voice it contained, a brilliant woman speaking across 3 centuries, finally, at last, being heard. The end.